The first time I saw this pre-packed combination of vegetables at a grocery store in Spain, I couldn't figure out why would it be so popular. It took me almost no time at all to discover everything in this pack are core ingredients used in lentil or bean stew. One of the healthiest dishes made in Spain in kitchens all across the country almost every week of the year. Hola, I'm Caroline Beck, and my videos are all about sharing recipes I've discovered while living in Spain so that you can feed yourself and your family the same healthy Mediterranean way every day. Most people think of this as the Mediterranean diet, and I've tagged each one of the recipes so that you can see how easy it is to follow it too. Let's get started by talking about the vegetables that are essential to this. I'm going to just dice these all up and they'll be ready to go. I'm also going to be adding 5 different kinds of beans. Now, you don't have to add 5, you can add whatever your favorite beans are, but beans are so popular in Spain and there are so many different varieties you can get that I love to just mix it up, and basically I use whatever I have in the pantry. Last night, I took that same amount of beans, covered them with cold water, and let them set overnight on the kitchen counter. And you can see these are almost doubled in size. It's going to be a really healthy dish. To that, we're going to add a can of chopped tomatoes, simply because it's in my pantry and they're easy to do. Garlic, naturally, an onion, 2 types of pimenton, the sweet and the spicy, a little bit of saffron, and a liter of vegetable broth, or frankly, however much brings it up to the maximum level in the Instapot or pressure cooker, and we'll talk about that as we go. And finally, I love to add a little bit of bacon to the dish because it adds a really meaty flavor without a lot of meat. So I picked this up at the butcher yesterday. I'm going to cut it up into small tranches, throw it in there, and get everything started with this. So let's go. I took a few minutes to get everything prepped. Everything's cut up to about the same size, and now comes the fun part. And if you have an Instapot, a pressure cooker, or slow cooker, you'll know how to prepare beans. I always start, because I can, putting all the bacon in and letting that get browned up. The browner it is, the more flavor we're going to get out of this little bit of meat. I put about 200 grams of bacon in here, and you can see the size of the chunk I used. It's not very big, but the amount of flavor it's going to add to these beans is amazing. It's been all of about 5 minutes, and the bacon is now crispy brown. It's going to give off all this amazing flavor. We're going to start to add everything else. I love this dish because it is just so simple. I want to toast the spices a little bit, so I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of sweet pimenton, 1 teaspoon of spicy pimenton, garlic, naturally, and just stir these things around a bit so that they get a little fragrant and I can smell it coming up out of the pot. There is nothing like a really good bean stew. Okay, now I've warmed up the spices so I can start adding the rest of the ingredients that make up any good sofrito. The leeks, put all these in. Add the onion. Onion isn't essential, but I love onion. The carrots and celery. Another really interesting thing about Spain, typically you don't buy a whole head of celery. They sell it by the stalk, which makes so much more sense. Because I don't know about you, but when I have a whole head of celery, I rarely use it up the way I really should. And now I'm going to stir these things around just to get a nice mix. Of course, I have to add some olive oil, and I'm not using a really strong flavor because this is going to be cooking in the stock pot for so long that won't help it, but the healthy oil will. So I'm adding, I would say, a good 1/4 cup. And this oil is arbequina because it's mild, but it's still flavorful and very healthy. The other thing you can see is that there's no real science to bean stew. You can add whatever vegetables, aromatics you want to start the stew. You can add bacon or not. You could add that olive oil or not. I think it's a good idea. But you've got so much flexibility. In fact, now I'm going to add the rest of the ingredients from that pre-pack. A turnip and 2 types of parsnips. I have to admit, when I was a kid, my mom used parsnips all the time. I wasn't crazy about them. I have come to love them. They add such an incredible floral flavor. Now we stir all that in. And the idea of making your bean stew whatever you want it to be, I had a half of yellow bell pepper in the refrigerator, so I thought, why not? I'm adding that. And I found a half of a red bell pepper in the refrigerator. So use what you've got. If they're all fresh ingredients, they're healthy ingredients. Now look at that. What an amazing start. I'm going to let this go just for a couple of minutes so that we get all the aromas mixed well together. It'll certainly cook because I'm putting it in a pressure cooker. We have a beautiful, colorful, and incredibly flavorful combination of things to get started with. By the way, I forgot the saffron, so I'm going to throw that in. Now I'm going to add that can of crushed tomatoes that I talked about and just dump that in. That starts to add the moisture that we need to go with the beans. Then I'm going to add beans, and I've measured out 5 cups of soaked beans. So figure out however many dry beans you need to get there, but I could have even gone with more. And it's about 2 to 1 from my experience, but it depends on whatever you end up with in terms of the type of beans you're using too. And finally, I'm going to add a tablespoon of salt and a liter of vegetable broth. As long as everything's well covered with enough broth, we're good to go. Now, all I have to do is put the lid on, set this to pressure cook. It'll take at least a half an hour, but remember you've got the amount of time it takes to get it up to pressure, which is about the same amount, and the amount of time it takes to reduce the pressure, which is about the same amount. So I'll be back in about an hour and a half, but I'll let you know, to see how this is doing when the bell goes off. I mentioned I thought it would take about an hour and a half. True to form, it's been an hour and a half. I've made this dish so many times I could probably do it in my sleep, and of course it couldn't be simpler. So let's take a peek, release the steam. Ha ha ha! Really tasty looking. The beans will be perfect. All the veggies, the flavor. I do want to taste it before I ladle it up. I want to see whether that amount of salt was right. You always have to be really careful when you first remove something from a pressure cooker because it's going to be very hot. It's great. I can taste the bacon. I can taste the pimentons. It's got a little kick, but barely. So I think we're ready. Let's give this a taste and see what we think. I have to admit, I'm pretty confident. I know it's going to be good. I make it all the time. The veggies are meltingly tender, but they're still in shape. The bacon, it falls apart, but it adds so much flavor to this dish without having to put very much meat in it. All the spices, a little bit of that spicy pimenton lifts the flavors of the whole dish, and the broth's amazing. So I know as the weeks go on through the winter, I've got plenty of bean soup to fix for lunch or dinner by just pulling it out of the freezer and popping it in a pan, warming it up, and I'll be good to go. Thanks a lot for joining me. I hope you get a chance to make this through the winter and enjoy all these wonderful ingredients Spanish style.